Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. At the end of this video I will be telling you about a collaboration that I have recently done. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the life of the Whitaker family from Texas in the USA. Kent Whitaker and Patricia Bartlett, known as Trisha, met on a blind date in the early 1970s. The pair hit it off straight away, fell in love, and was soon married. Trisha was an elementary school teacher and Kent was an accountant, and the pair enjoyed a very comfortable lifestyle. Their first son, Thomas Bartlett Whitaker, who became known as Bart, was born on the 31st of December 1979, and 4 years later their family was completed by the arrival of their second son, Kevin, who was born on the 19th of March 1984. The family lived in a large house in the affluent suburb of Sugar Land in Texas. Their house was seen by many of the boys' friends as a cool place to hang out and was often full of local children who all viewed Trisha and Kent with great affection. The family seemed very happy, with many seeing them as having a perfect life. Their oldest son Bart did well at school, had a quirky sense of humour and enjoyed cycling with his dad. Kevin, the more sensitive son, looked up to his older brother, who he saw as the cool one. During his time at Clements High School, Bart, along with some of his friends, were caught breaking into the school and, disappointed with this behaviour, Trisha and Kent decided to move Bart to a private Christian academy to continue his education. On 10th of December 2003, the family was celebrating Bart's imminent graduation from the Sam Houston State University. They had a meal at the Papado Seafood Kitchen where Trisha and Kent presented Bart with a gift for his graduation. A long dreamed of Rolex watch which had cost them around $4,000. After leaving the restaurant that evening, the family returned home at around 8:30. Kevin parked the car and, as he and Trisha made their way to the front door, Bart checked his phone while Kent hung back to wait for his older son. As Kevin went into the house, he was shot directly in the chest. A second shot followed, hitting Trisha as she walked through the front door. Kent rushed forward, only to be propelled back by a shot to the shoulder. As Bart approached, he saw a figure dressed in black, wearing a ski mask. Following a brief struggle, Bart too was shot. Hearing the gunfire, a neighbour arrived at the Whitakers' house and immediately alerted the emergency services. Trisha, Kent and Bart were airlifted to hospital, but Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, Trisha also succumbed to her injuries. Both Kent and Bart underwent surgery for their gunshot wounds, and although seriously injured, both went on to recover from their injuries. Upon initial inspection of the crime scene, it appeared that the family had returned home and interrupted a burglary of their property, and the perpetrator had panicked and opened fire. However, the investigating officers soon began to suspect that this may be too simple an explanation. A search of the house found that none of the valuables had been moved or taken. Small items such as watches and laptops were still lying in plain sight. Additionally, the drawers in the main bedroom were open, but rather than showing signs of being quickly searched, they had all been neatly and uniformly pulled out. It was soon established that the murder weapon was the Whitakers' own gun, which had been taken from a gun safe in their house, which had been pried open. Routine questioning of both Kent and Bart followed, where they provided details about the horrific end to their graduation celebrations. The day after the shootings, it was discovered that Bart hadn't actually graduated. In fact, he was nowhere close. Instead, he was a freshman who was on probation because he had been failing to attend any classes. This began to ring warning bells with the investigating officers, but Bart explained that he had lied so as not to disappoint his family. Bart was hoping that he would be able to keep the truth from his family until he was eventually able to graduate. Less than a week after the murder, a service was held. This was attended by over 1,000 people in honour of Tricia and Kevin. Everyone was shocked by this brutal attack in what was considered to be a very safe community. Kent and Bart were in attendance, being supported by their family and friends. However, the police were closely watching Bart for entirely different reasons. The previous evening, at around 11:30 p.m, a man by the name of Adam Hipp met with investigators to tell them about information which he believed would help them solve the murders. Adam had been a friend of Bart and told the detectives that Bart had approached him several years earlier to ask for his help with a plan that he had devised to kill his entire family. This plan was almost identical to what had actually happened to the family the week before. The plan had even included the fact that Bart should be shot in the shoulder in order to divert suspicion from himself. Kent was told that his son was a suspect in the murders, but he never believed that Bart could have anything to do with the crime. The police believed otherwise. They decided to interview Bart's current friends to see if he had approached any of these in the same way that he had Adam several years before. Two such friends, Chris Brasher and Stephen Champagne, who worked at the Bentwater Yacht and Country Club with Bart, were questioned, but they denied any involvement. They were asked to provide DNA and scent samples. These scent samples were then matched with scents found at the scene by bloodhounds. Chris and Stephen continued to deny any involvement in the shootings. The investigation continued, and 7 months later, Bart told his father that he was heading out to the club and that he would see him the following day. However, Bart simply disappeared. He had heard that the detectives were closing in on him and had decided to make his escape. With Bart nowhere to be found, the investigation focused on the two remaining suspects, Chris and Stephen. Eventually, Stephen Champagne cracked under the pressure of the police focus and admitted that he had been the getaway driver on the night of the shootings. He stated that Chris Brasher was the gunman, but it was Bart who had masterminded the whole crime. Stephen led the police to a bag of evidence that had been thrown off of the bridge over Lake Conroe. In this bag was a chisel with paint fragments that could be matched to the gun safe at the Whitaker's house, ammunition, and the cell phones used by the men to plan the attack. Almost 2 years after the murders, Stephen and Chris were arrested, but the authorities and Kent still did not know where Bart was hiding. Unknown to them, Bart had started a new life in Mexico, around 40 miles from the Texas border. He had a small apartment, a job in a furniture store, and a girlfriend. His girlfriend's family had taken him in as one of their own. Bart had told them that he was an unwanted only child of a sex worker. He told them how he had been shot while serving in Afghanistan in order to explain the bullet scar on his shoulder. Bart was living under the name of Rudy Rios. He had worked with the real Rudy Rios in the US and had paid Rudy $3,000 to help him flee to Mexico. When Rudy saw that there was a $10,000 reward to help find Bart, he decided to cash in. In September 2005, the Mexican police arrested Bart on an immigration charge, and he was handed over to the US police at the border town of Laredo, Texas. He was then arrested and charged for the murder of his mother and brother. Upon seeing his father, he apologized, stating that he was so sorry for it all. 3 years after the murders, the case went to trial. As he was charged with killing more than one person, the prosecution looked for Bart to receive the death penalty for his crimes. At the trial, the prosecutor showed that Bart stood to inherit around $1.5 million upon the death of his family, and Stephen testified that Bart had offered him and Chris a share of this for their part in the crime. It also came to light that Bart had attempted to carry out his plan on 3 previous occasions, in addition to that previously told to police by Adam Hipp, a plan which had never got past the discussion stage. Bart had also attempted to recruit 2 college roommates to carry out the plan. On that occasion, they had got so far as to break into his home before being scared off by an alarm. There had been additional discussions with a 3rd group in April 2001, during which a college friend notified the police of Bart's intentions. Bart's family had been informed of this murderous plan at the time, but Bart had managed to explain it away as a simple misunderstanding. With the extent of evidence against Bart and the fact that he had all but admitted his guilt, the defence attorney used the trial to show why Bart's life should be spared. Kent, a deeply religious man, had forgiven his son and did not want him to be sentenced to death for his crimes. The trial lasted for 7 days, and after just 2 hours the jury returned a verdict: guilty of capital murder. Once the guilty verdict had been announced, the trial entered the punishment phase, and it was during this time that Bart spoke openly about killing his family for the first time. He said that he felt horrible about himself and about what he had done. When asked why he had killed them, he stated that he always felt that the love which they gave him was conditional upon a standard that he could not reach. However, there was no evidence whatsoever that this was true. Kent, knowing that his son's life was at risk, attempted to persuade the jurors to forgive Bart for what he had done. Kent never wanted the death penalty to be considered, and believed that his wife would not have wanted this either. The prosecution, however, believed that there were no mitigating factors, and Bart's disconnect with reality would always make him a danger to others. Therefore, they believed he should be sentenced to death. After jury deliberations of 10 hours, his punishment was set: death by lethal injection. Kent vowed never to give up on his son and spent the next decade lobbying for Bart's sentence to be commuted to life in prison. Appeals followed, and once these had all been exhausted, Bart's death warrant was signed on the 1st of November 2017. His execution was scheduled for 6 p.m. on the 22nd of February 2018. In the weeks before the execution date, Kent made a desperate plea for mercy to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, stating that he did not believe his son should be released, but that his execution would make Kent a victim once again. Just 2 days before Bart's execution, the board made a recommendation for clemency. However, the final decision would need to come from the governor, Greg Abbott. As the execution day arrived, there had still been no word from the governor. Kent visited his son for a final time to say his goodbyes. Bart was given his final meal of chicken enchiladas, rice, beans and vegetables. As he was being prepared to be strapped to the gurney, with just 40 minutes left before his execution, the governor, Greg Abbott, spared his life. It was the first time that the governor had done this. After spending 11 years on death row, Bart released a statement stating that he was thankful for the decision, not for himself, but for his father. He will remain in prison until the day he dies. The gunman, Chris Brasher, was sentenced to life imprisonment and will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. Stephen Champagne testified against both Chris and Bart and received a 15-year sentence, from which he has now been released. Since the tragedy, Kent has remarried and published a book about the shootings called Murder by Family. He travels the country to speak about the power of forgiveness. I'd just like to pass on my thanks to Elizabeth Spedding for suggesting this case. I also mentioned at the beginning that I've recently collaborated with a channel. It's called That Crime Guy, and the case we covered is the Railway Killers. I'll put a link in the description for this video, and there will be a link at the end photos in the video. I really hope you get time to visit and listen to me and That Crime Guy working together. As always, please add any comments down below about this case. Thanks once again for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Whilst on death row, Bart has continued studying and received a Bachelor of Arts in English and Sociology and a Masters of Arts in English. Goodbye.